When evening came, David went down to the town again, and again the next evening, and then the next, and each time he learnt something new, enough to occupy his thoughts all day long in his rocky hiding place. He had hit upon a good story. During his second evening, he had read something on a wall about a circus. He understood it was kind of a theatre that travelled about. If he was questioned, he would say he came from one and he was going to rejoin it somewhere else, somewhere far enough away to prevent people from finding out immediately if it were true. But he had no occasion to try this story out. He went down to the town again during the evening. He was gradually getting to know it inside out. The narrow, crooked streets, the open space down by the seafront, the square where the church stood. He always went there, last of all on that way back to the rock. He would have had a fresh mind in a beautiful walk with his patterns of so many coloured patterned stone. He had not summoned up enough courage to enter the church, although he would have dearly loved to see what it looked like inside. David would sometimes stand in the shadows outside a shop and listen to the conversation within. It was easy enough, for they always talked very loudly with a frequent burst of laughter. In that way he learnt what many things were used for, things that were strange to him, that seemed to be taken for granted by the people round him. He had not yet heard anyone talk about them. Sometimes the fact that they were obviously none of them in the town that led to rather less careful. He always walked on if anyone looked at him, but he sometimes came near to forgetting his fears, and he quite openly filled his bottle on the pump down by the seafront and accepted several loaves from the man who made them. At first he would stand for a long time, hidden in the shadows outside the shop, listening to the baker's conversation with his customers. But it was never about them. He never asked David any questions except whether he were hungry, and then he would be given a loaf and a friendly smile. And so it was almost out of habit now that David hid in the dark outside and listened. That evening the man was talking to someone, and the good catch he had. For a moment David's heart stood still with fear. Then he realised what they were talking, not of people, but of fish caught at sea. He stood there a little longer, in his relief forgetting to listen. Then suddenly he heard a man say, "Who's that boy who comes here every evening for a loaf? Do you know?" "What boy?" "A thin, ragged boy, but always very clean. He looked a bit foreign." David pressed himself flat against the wall and stood there as if glued to the spot. Another man was speaking now, one who spoke differently from the rest, more after David's own fashion. "I've seen a strange boy every evening this week. He stands and looks at the church. I assumed he must have come over for the harvest. Takes on a number of casual workers at this time. Maybe it belongs to him." Then a woman said something. "No one's come yet for harvest. I would have been told. I've seen the boy too. It must be the same one. He doesn't look like the others, and he always moves off when you look at him. He's got very strange looking eyes." "In what way strange?" That was one they called speaking again. "I've only ever seen him standing in the dark on the other side of the square. Does he look as if he's up to mischief?" No, I don't know about that, but he's a strange boy. If you smile at him, he doesn't smile back. He doesn't run off either. He just turns and walks away. And his eyes, they're so quiet looking. Perhaps we should get hold of him and ask where he comes from." David heard no more. With no more sound than a puff of wind, he was down the street and inside the first open door, through a long dark passage and out again in the other street. Never before had he found it so difficult to walk along calmly as if he felt no fear. He increased his speed, out of the town, out to the rocks. He must get away at once before they began looking for him. They might be out sending them already. David waited a long, long time, hiding by the side of the road before he ventured scrambling down to his hiding place. The last 2 evenings he had left his bundle there, and now he must take it with him. But first he had to make sure that no one was following. When he reached the safety of the rocks, he lay down, but not to sleep, only because his legs felt as if they would not bear his weight any longer. He lay there. He could see lights from the town below. They looked beautiful in the dark. But he had been right when he had sensed that there was danger there. He must get away, that very night. The thought filled him with despair. He had begun to feel what was in this town, that the rock belonged to him. He knew every little irregularity when it surfaced, and every morning when he undid his bundle, he would arrange his things in the same way. The little stream higher up across the road had been his alone, and every morning he had found an orange. All the beauty of the place had been his, the sea, the coastline that curved along its shores, all the beautiful colours, the blues, the greens and reds, and the gay horses, brightly coloured too and gleaming like fruits in the sunlight. Before he had come to the town, he had known about nothing but death. Here he had learnt to live, to decide things for himself. He had learnt what it was like to wash in clean water at the sunshine until he was clean himself, and what it was like to satisfy his hunger with food that tasted good. He had learnt the sound of the laughter that was free from cruelty. He had learnt the meaning of beauty, and now he must leave it and never return. David cried, but not for long. He sat up and looked once more at the lights of the town. He had also learnt to think again without being afraid of doing it, and he could go on thinking. He was still free, and if he thought about everything carefully, as clearly and as sensibly as he could, and remembered all he had learnt from his place, then freedom might be his for a long time yet. He had been right in supposing that they were everywhere, even where he was now, but he had also found it true that some people were good and kind, and if they no longer dared to pretend that they had not seen him about, then it would be his own fault for staying there too long. But he must never stay in one place for more than one evening. He must always continue to avoid people as much as possible, and he must remember not to look at them. David wished he knew what was so strange about his eyes. What did it mean when they said that they were quiet? Perhaps one day he would come across a mirror and find out what he looked like. David sighed a little. A boy could not very well disguise himself. Grown men could grow beards or shave them off, and if you had money you could change your clothes or wear glasses or dye your hair. But when you were a boy with neither beard nor money, it was no good thinking about disguising yourself. David packed everything except his compass into the bundle and now stood up. When he had crossed over the plank, he drew it after him and carried it right up to the roadway, that no one would see where he had been living. He stood still for a moment and looked down at the lights of the town. Then he set off quietly up the mountain slope towards the north.